This talk is going to be about OpenBazaar. This is kind of a little bit of a longer version of the lightning talk from yesterday. I guess I'm just going to cover kind of what OpenBazaar is and why I think it's valuable, and then I'll give you kind of maybe a little bit of a history, how it came into being, and we'll talk about how we ended up working with Ipfs and Libp2p and how we use that in the project. So I guess we could start with what is OpenBazaar. I just a couple of headlines here that I kind of like. So this is Forbes magazine. It's anarchist eBay on acid. I don't know, it's kind of a nice headline. There's America's most dangerous tech startup. This was Fortune magazine. That one's a little bit of a badge of honor. But what is it at the end? It's an e-commerce platform, right? So you can think of kind of like eBay or Etsy, but it's a peer-to-peer application without, the eBay company running it. So everyone kind of connects to each other. They trade directly with each other. There's no middleman to kind of take a cut, censor listings, this sort of stuff. So this is an example. This is maybe a little bit more like Etsy in terms of the actual functionality, and that all the users have a storefront here. This one's just selling like greeting cards. But one of the most obvious advantages that comes to mind at first is, you get rid of the company that runs the network and essentially owns the network, and you take out their cut of all the transactions. So if you're a seller on eBay, eBay takes like 10% of every sale that you make, and then PayPal is going to take even more. So if you've got, some of these sellers have like razor thin profit margins. So if you're like at like 5% profit margin and eBay's taking 10%, if you get rid of eBay's cut, you've tripled your sales, right? So instead of this money going to kind of a big company, it stays with kind of like the little merchant. The other main benefit is, when it's like censorship resistance, right? This is one of my favorite headlines. Witches are furious at Etsy for banning the sale of spells, right? So this is what happens when you have ownership of a platform. You can make these kind of decisions, say we're just going to not allow this on our platform. And in this case, this is a little bit, a little bit weird, but people are finding value in trading this stuff. That's why they're trading it. So you ban it, you disenfranchise a whole community of people. And it's not just, of course, corporations that that own the platform that can censor things. We have the government. This guy's selling like black market straws on OpenBazaar. So this is a little bit of a joke, but it's an example. Of there's all kinds of things that are like arbitrarily illegal that probably shouldn't be, that governments come in and demand that they don't be sold on these particular platforms. We've seen this, we have the SESTA FOSTA regulations that came down ostensibly to prevent like sex trafficking, but they end up shutting down an entire industry of like sex work on, Backpage gets shut down, Craigslist Personals gets taken offline, and a bunch of other sites end up going down too. And this is because of their centralized architecture. So you have essentially an entire industry ends up going down as a result of the essentially architectural choices of these type of companies. Still good? And hidden services don't tend to work much better, right? This was the Silk Road's website when they got shut down, and we've seen quite a few other hidden services have been taken down over the years. However they end up doing it, it's at the end of the day, they're just web servers, right? They're just centralized web servers. They own the platform. You take that down, the whole thing goes down. So, OpenBazaar started, the headline on this article goes all the way back April of 2014. There was a Bitcoin conference in Toronto, and there was a hackathon, and the winning entry for that hackathon was something called Dark Market. This was put forward by Amir Taki, some of you might know that name. Will Swanson from Airbits, which is now Edge, he was involved with that. And I think one more, like Pablo Martin, I think. And I think they won like $20,000 or something with this entry. And so this was kind of like what it looked like back then. So what ended up happening from here, I think, my boss, Brian Hoffman, who's our like founder of OpenBazaar, he was like looking to find a project to kind of work on in the space, and he thought dark market was really cool. So he kind of emailed Amir and said, hey, can I help out with this? Are you going to be working on it? What's going on? And Amir said, I don't know, we don't have any plans to like continue working on it. We've got other stuff we're doing. So if you want to take it over, go right ahead. So Brian took it over. He forked the project, changed the name and the branding to OpenBazaar. This was one of the very, very early versions of OpenBazaar. And the vision was not just to like service these kind of like dark markets too, but we have a broader vision of enabling free trade across all sectors too, not just the narrow niche of whatever's being sold on the darknet. So this lasted. They worked for about like a year. This was before I joined. They worked for about a year on this project in their spare time. Every time they put out a new release, I was all excited about it. So I downloaded, and it never worked, right? Like, I don't even think I could get to this screen the way it worked back then. So at some point, like it was Brian and our two other founders, Sam and Washington, they kind of said, it's either it's not going anywhere as a part-time project. So we either need to kind of like shut it down, stop working on it, or quit our jobs and work full-time on it. So they decided to quit their jobs. They took some venture capital. That's kind of where I come in. This was, I guess, maybe the first kind of working version that we put out. This was the first version that I worked on. This really was kind of like an MVP. The team consisted of like me writing the back-end code, and we had one UI developer for like most of this. So this like barely worked, but it did work, and people were able to complete trades and whatnot. The architecture going all the way back to dark market and through this version and even up to here, it was really a horrible architecture. It was just like a poor man's web server. The nodes just connected to each other, and they just requested data using like a protocol that was like many times worse than HTTP. So it wasn't great. And this one, I think my contribution here was to just add a DHT to it. So while we were building this one, just trying to get like something out the door to demonstrate to investors that this can work and people will use it, I'm thinking about how we can re-architect this thing to kind of make it more robust. So in my mind, what we wanted data to be more distributed. We don't want this web server model where it only lives on a single server. The protocol needs to be a lot more extensible, upgradable. We had some issues where like, I want to integrate Tor, but we were using like a UDP transport at the time, and Tor doesn't support UDP, so we need to like switch out the transport, and that was just a big mess because it just was not designed to be like pluggable and extensible and what have you. Similar issues with upgrading like the keys and the identities and this sort of stuff. So we need it to be a lot more extensible and a whole lot faster. So this ultimately is what OpenBazaar looks like today. But from there, it was, I'm planning this out kind of how I want it to work in my mind. And in my mind, I had something very similar to IPFS, maybe more specifically like IPNS, the way the whole thing works. And at some point, it was Washington, one of our co-founders, he sent me the IPFS white paper, and he's like, hey, did you read this thing? So I read it, and I was like, wow, that's pretty much exactly what I was thinking of doing. And I mean, what's even more interesting is not only, everyone has a white paper, right? But not only was there a white paper, but they've got some working code. There was, alpha version that I could play around with. And so I thought, this might be something that we can possibly use. Ended up meeting Juan in New York. I think it was at a Blockstat summit like maybe 3 years ago. And we had dinner with him. I got to kind of pick his brain. I just told Juan this last week, but it was, back then, IPFS was a little rough. And, Juan's kind of like promising the world, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, it's all going to be great. And like Brian says to me, he's like, what do you think of this Juan guy? He sounds like he's full of shit, doesn't he? But I was like, no, I think he sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Anyway, ended up deciding to go with it, and it was, obviously a great choice. So IPFS is primarily used for, fetching the data from other stores, primarily IPNS2, like you enter the store ID and we just load all the data that way. And then some more screenshots of what it looks like. And then Libp2p, so the question then becomes, how are we going to use IPFS in OpenBazaar? Like, am I just going to compile the binary and just talk to it using the API? Like, that's one option, but then we still have all the, like, OpenBazaar specific stuff that needs to be written. And it's like, we could continue doing it the way we were doing it. It was a Python app, and we could just, but like all the same functionality that you have in Libp2p today, we more or less would need to kind of like replicate that if we were going to, do it the right way. And, so at the end of the day, just like the most obvious choice was to kind of we just moved everything over to Go. Works a million times better than Python does for this purpose. And so we import IPFS as a library, and then that gives us access to Libp2p as a library. And so we just built out the actual like OpenBazaar protocol on top of using Libp2p that way. So just kind of the way we use it, like the protocol multiplexing. So the OpenBazaar protocol is just like another protocol in the muxer there, along with all the other IPFS protocols when nodes need to connect to each other for making orders or chat and all of this stuff. We use the crypto library pretty extensively for the signing, encryption of messages, or I should say encryption. There's already the like SecIO layer, but we have like this separate like offline. You can send a message to a node that's offline, and so it encrypts it with their IDs and all of that stuff. Just a few changes to the DHT, like increasing like the time to live on certain data. So it lasts a little bit longer. And then, going back to my example with the, the problems we had before with Tor, now that you have a pluggable transport layer, it was pretty easy to just write a onion transport for Tor for people. It doesn't use it by default, but if people want to use Tor, they can just run Tor in the background, open OpenBazaar, and it all just kind of works together pretty nicely. It creates a hidden service so it can take incoming connections. And then PubSub, we do use PubSub right now. It's used for IPNS in the app, but I'm also working on using it for some other things related to like sharing data and making it easier for like search engines to subscribe the data to index the stuff on OpenBazaar and what have you. Some stats. So we don't have any like real visibility into actually what's going on in the network. Like I said, all the communication's encrypted. People own their own data. We're not like collecting everybody's data the way like Facebook does or what have you. But we did just recently add like people can opt in to sending us statistics if they want. And it's like we estimate probably about 30% of users opt in, just based on the number of opt-ins versus the number of downloads that we have. And so like extrapolating that outwards, this is just like last month. Approximately maybe 85 to 14,000 users, between 1,500, 2,500 purchases, 120 to 200,000 in sales. And then if you compare that to like eBay, which is like taking a 10% cut of everything, this would be OpenBazaar users saved about $10,000 to $20,000 last month. So these aren't like world-changing numbers, but for an app that's still kind of like in alpha, and we're still from like a feature set, we're still probably only maybe 60% of the way where we need to get to kind of be feature competitive with some of these other platforms. But it's not bad though, and it does seem to be kind of growing and picking up, and certainly as IPFS is maturing, things are working a lot better. Some of our challenges, so like we have like there's sort of this trade-off. Users kind of want like longer term persistence of their data. So one of the things in the IPNS records, I have them set in the DHT, they last a week, which a week, it's maybe a little bit on the short end because that implies that like users need to kind of sign on like once a week to kind of republish everything and make sure their data still, is live. So we kind of like it to not have to do that. But on the other hand, we have this issue with like people abandoning their stores. You know, they open OpenBazaar, they try it out, they post some listings. And the last thing you want is to have a bunch of abandoned stores where people try and make purchases and no one's responding to their orders. So there's this kind of weird trade-off between the desire to have data stick around longer and be more persistent, and then kind of wanting to purge the people who have abandoned their stores. And so identifying these kind of abandoned stores is a little bit of a challenge. Up-to-date search results, this is very similar to the first bullet point, but like the search, we have like, the way we've designed it is, you know, the search engines are pluggable, so anyone can create a search engine for OpenBazaar if they want, crawl the network, and you just provide a JSON API and the app can read from it. So several different people, we provide one, and there's already several other people who have created search engines for OpenBazaar too. And it's neat because you can like index like specific types of products if you only want to, there's some specific category that you want to make searchable or what have you. But the challenge there is like, you know, sometimes you serve up some data and the user clicks it in the search results and then it doesn't load because they've like, you know, it's like dropped out of the DHT or something like this. So like, you can imagine like you crawl a store and then an hour later their IPNS record expires. So, you know, you don't know, should you serve that up, shouldn't you? So what we need to do is kind of get a better ways of measuring and estimating how long this data is going to be available for. So maybe like checking the expiration date on the IPNS records when we're indexing it, and possibly like surfacing some more data about when was the last time you connected to a node, so that like search engines can read from this and make these decisions on what types of results to serve up. Reputation is still kind of a big open question. This is like a perpetual research topic in like distributed systems, but like right now it's there, you can leave ratings and reviews, and we've done it in such a way that like you can't fake people can't fake ratings for other stores. So like the way the trade flow works is kind of like the vendor has to provide a signature for the rating that you end up using. And he can't get paid if he doesn't provide that signature. So it ends up working out such that you can't fake ratings for other stores, but they can fake their own ratings, right? Which surprisingly, people haven't really figured this out yet, right? You'd think that this would be like one of the first things that vendors would figure out, but instead they're trying to kind of like, I don't know, mess with like the HTML or something to make it look like they have more stars. But like, so that's still an open issue. We do have this escrow-based system where kind of like anyone can be an escrow agent on the network. So your funds kind of go into a 2 of 3 multi-sig account with another user. And what we saw people doing, they would create that, we call it a moderator. So people would set themselves as like a moderator, or create another account as a moderator. Then they would set themselves on their stores. Because the way it works is the vendors kind of pick the moderator, and then the buyer, he kind of offers that as like a bundle of services, and then the buyer is supposed to decide, you know, if I don't recognize the moderator, I don't trust them, then I don't buy this listing. So vendors were kind of like setting themselves as moderators and then scamming people. So really what you should do is don't buy it if you don't recognize the moderator, but people were just buying it anyway. So we just created kind of like a little program where we kind of like vet some moderators, and we publish like that list of like, here's the ones that we recommend. And so people, if they trust us, then they can by extension kind of trust that moderator. So it's kind of creating a little bit of like a web of trust thing going on. And we'd like to extend that so other people can publish lists of people they trust and that sort of stuff. So still a work in progress there. Content curation, the browsing experience in OpenBazaar is probably the worst part right now. But it's kind of like, we need a way to kind of like provide curated content and have that like brought to the front like you would expect on like eBay or Amazon or something like this, but do it in a way that's not like terribly centralized. So this is probably going to open it up to other people to be able to kind of curate this content, but the question, what's the protocol look like? How do we do that? It would be nice to have like communities who are interested in like particular products or features kind of like curating this type of content, but we'll see. And then, you know, getting this working on mobile and web, you know, is high priority. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we'd like to use the JS IPFS and JS Libp2p to get it working on the web. And then, I don't know, token, I know the investors are really like pushing token big time in OpenBazaar, and there's a lot of questions like how does that even fit in with OpenBazaar, if it does at all, or if there are any ideas on how to integrate one, or whether we should just not do it at all, but we'll see. So you can find us at openbazaar.org or on Twitter, so thank you.